Okay. So in this week's parsha, it's interesting because you have the idea is Moshe is repeating the past. And the beginning of the parsha is repeating the events that happened 40 years earlier, 38 years earlier. That makes sense. He's talking to a new generation, and they don't always remember exactly what happened in the past. Maybe some of them were there when they were very young. Um, Maybe they heard the stories, but maybe they didn't hear the official version. So we understand that Moshe at the end of his life wants to repeat and wants to retell. Okay. Um, the second half of the parsha is very interesting and intriguing because seemingly it's not important. Why is it not important? Because Moshe is telling them events that happened in the very recent history. He's telling them what happened. Not only he's telling them that happened in the last few months. We conquered the land. God told us to leave to go around, bypass our cousins, the children of Edom, children of Esav, Ammon and Moab, which were the children of Lot. We had to go around, and then we conquered the lands of Sichon and Og, tried to stop us from passing through to get to the Jordan River. And we went to battle and we won. And it goes into great detail, even though all the people in this audience know it, they would experienced it firsthand. We actually read it last week and 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, all the aftermath of those events. Also, another thing is we also go into the ancient history of those lands. Who conquered from who before the Jewish conquest? It seems like a lot of information about things that everybody knows, and it's not relevant if we're talking about recalling the historical events. So that leads to different interpretations of what Moshe is trying to do here. And one way to think about it is to think about Moshe's critiquing. And the most important critique, there are other sins that Moshe is going to address later. The most important critique in this week's parsha is, of course, the big elephant in the room, which is why it took 40 years from when the Exodus to get to this point, where right in the beginning of the parsha, it says Achad Asar Yom Chorev is 11-day journey from Sinai. Right? It's 11-day journey, took 40 years. What took so long is the elephant in the room question. And the answer, of course, is the sin of the spies. And Moshe talks about the sin of the spies in great detail in this parsha. And basically, this is the failing. Now, there were other failings. Some of them he alludes to in the beginning of the parsha. Some of them he's going to talk about in the future. But in the context of this week's parsha, that's the big deal, big failure. What's the failure? They were afraid to conquer, afraid to take it to the next step and fight for their promised land. And that's the big failure. Okay. Now, what happens is if you want to just critique somebody sort of to put them down, then you talk about the failure. But Moshe spends just as much time talking about the success. What is the success? That this generation was healed. When it came to fight the most powerful kings in the region, Sichon and Og, they show up, they have faith. Maybe they're afraid. It says Moshe himself was afraid, but they do what's necessary. They rely on their courage, they rely on faith in God, and they conquer the land. So maybe not the land west of the Jordan, Israel proper, but the land east of the Jordan. So, in other words, in Moshe is not just highlighting the failure; he's highlighting the success. So, on one hand, you could think about it when you critique, you also want to highlight the success. Another thing is to show the people that I'm telling you that you are able to overcome. And that's why when you think about the story, don't think about the story as we are so terrible, but think about it. We had this challenge, we grew from this challenge, we have been transformed, and now we're ready for the next stop. So now it's a total different story. It's not rebuke, it's rebuke leading to the success. Go ahead, Dr. Bob.
Good morning, Rabbi. Just wondering why Rabbi Sachs makes such a big difference between the rendering of the Meraglim um, in, I guess, numbers
Yes.
and the accounting now.
Yeah. So the reason why he makes a big deal about it is because it's true every time the Torah says something twice, but especially true in Deuteronomy, that whenever the Torah says something, repeats a story, like for example, the famous story where the Torah repeats it almost 3 times is where Rebecca meets Eliezer meets Rebecca at the well, and then it turns out that she's the relative and a good spouse for Isaac. So we have the events how they unfold. Then we have the events the way Eliezer tells the family what happens. And it sounds like a repetition. Everyone says, why is it repeated? And we explain why it's repeated. But there's some moment you look at it a little bit carefully, you see that whenever the Torah repeats a story, it never repeats it the same way. There's always a change. And in this story of Moshe repeating the spies, there are significant changes. There's always changes. There's significant changes. So that leads to a very interesting question about the whole question of the objective versus subjective. And when Moshe is talking to the people, is the point what happened? Is that the most interesting point, or is the point, um, or is the point to communicate the message that he's trying to communicate? So, for example, I didn't read. I just started reading Rabbi Sachs's essay, but I didn't finish it. I saw it was from the past, right? I think 2011. But in any case, I'm just giving an example. Maybe he brings that example. In the way Moshe tells the story to the spies. I'm sorry, repeats the story of the spies now to the people. The spies never said the land was bad. That's not what he says. He says the spies came back and said it's a wonderful land. Now, is that true or false? It's not the whole story. It's true about Joshua and Kalev. It's not true about the 10 spies. Okay? But Moshe is here not to tell you about what happened with the spies. You want to blame the spies. You want to blame your grandmother, right? Someone goes to therapy and they have a whole list of people they're going to blame. The purpose of the conversation now is not to find people to blame, for the people to take responsibility for their part. So if you needed evidence that we could do it, the spies said we could do it. Okay, it was the minority of the spies. It's not the full story. But I'm just trying to show that when Moshe is talking to them, the purpose is not to tell the objective recounting of the facts that happened, because that's very interesting for the historian. It's less interesting for a person who's trying to grow from the experience. What I have to think about it is, what is it relevant to me? What do I take from this story? Which part is my responsibility? Because just to assume blame, which you could have, but sometimes when I'm blaming the other person, what I'm really doing is I'm trying to say that I'm trying to absolve myself of my responsibility and the part that I was responsible for. So that's just an example of something glaring where in Moshe's retelling it, the spies never said it's bad. Never said we can't. Never said it's bad. So people, the audience, came up with that conclusion. Now, so again, that's not what happened. But for the purpose of this discussion, we're not talking about everybody else. We're talking about you or me, the spies. Okay, the spies. So that's between them and their therapist. But I'm talking about me. What's my part in the story? So I think that the whole speech is obviously, it's not a history. Torah is not history. Torah is, the Rebbe always said this all the time. Torah, the word etymology of the word Torah is lesson. The lesson is Moshe's retelling the story. What do we have to learn from the story? We have to learn that when this comes to us, we draw the right conclusions. And you want to know what actually happened? Okay, go look elsewhere. Right? Look in the fourth book. So that's a whole. My point is, it's glaring. It jumps out right at you. You have to explain the discrepancies. Now there are different ways of explaining it. One way of explaining it is what I'm saying, which is Moshe here is not interested so much in the facts. He's interested in the facts that are relevant to me, as opposed to figure out, why am I this way? Who could I blame for the circumstance? Okay, you want to who could I blame? I could write a book. Who could I blame? But the question is, what am I doing? What is my part? Am I taking responsibility for my part? That's what I would say. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I think you partially answered my question, because my question was a little bit broader and related to something you said at the very beginning, that like maybe there were different versions of the story. Maybe some heard about the patriarchs, or this and that, and now in this book you have the version from the person who had it firsthand, and he's putting the right glasses on us to how to understand it. So how can we apply it to our lives and learn the history, which is being rewritten as we speak in our days all the time, including the land of Israel and
right.
And all.
So I think that the philosophers, I'm not an expert, but I don't know which ones, but I think the Western philosophers talk about the objective versus the subjective, and you have to realize that there's the subjective truth, how I experience it, and that may or may not be the objective truth. But even if it's not the objective truth, it's my truth. And we're not talking about saying my truth is the truth, but realizing that both could occur at the same time. In other words, how I'm not talking about postmodernism. I'm not talking about there is no objective truth. There could be an objective truth, and together with that, there could be a subjective truth, and it's not a contradiction. And that's the first four books and the fifth book. And I don't have to negate the subjective perspective to realize it's an objective truth. And the objective truth is very nice, but it's not necessarily my truth. And Kabbalah is very into this because we talked about this when we talked about the Tanya. There's the upper unity and lower unity. There's God's perspective and our perspective. And who's right? So there's the objective perspective, which maybe is God, maybe, but there's the subjective perspective, which is us. And if you want to talk about, Dr. Tamarin just signing on. If you want to talk about in a relationship, right? There's the objective, there's the subjective. So I say, I feel this way, right? Someone is going to come to the doctor or to the therapist and say, I feel that, I don't know, my spouse is not listening to me. And the spouse says, I am listening to you. Who's right? Who's right? So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter who's right. In other words, the subjective experience is valuable. Now, the objective experience is also valuable. And both are true. There's room in the four books for the objective and the fifth book for the subjective. And we have to live our life in both those planes. And both have to be important. And both have to be addressed, is what I'm trying to say.
But it's also about steering the whole narration towards the more like the lesson part instead of being rewriting in their own. I mean, objective can also have different
right,
goals.
Right. But I want to emphasize that we're not erasing the first four books. We're not saying we have a New Testament, God forbid, we have the fifth book and throw out the four books because the fifth book gives you the main points. No. The whole point is, like Rabbi Sachs is doing, look at the four, look at the five, look at the two stories, realize they both have some truth, realize they both enhance each other, and now negotiate what the conclusion is, depending on what your point of view is. But what I'm trying to say is, it's very important to think about the subjective, which is book 5. We talked about this on Tuesday as well. That's prayer as opposed to Torah study. But it's also very important to realize that my subjective truth may not be the truth. And you could have both of those in the same time. In the West, we like to think it's one or the other. Either I believe in absolute truth, or I believe there is no absolute truth. And everybody has their own truth, and everyone has their own narrative, and there is no truth. And you have to choose one or the other. But Torah, certainly Hasidism, certainly Kabbalah, but Torah also says, no, they both could be true at the same time. There's a statement, God spoke one thing and we heard something else. In other words, like God said the Ten Commandments, and there's two versions of the Ten Commandments. We're going to read it next week, right? The second version. So the point here is that it's not one or the other. There could be the objective truth, and then there could be the way we experience the objective truth. Like even in the Talmud, the whole Talmud is both these and these are the words of the living God, which means there's the word of God, which is absolute, but there's the way people understand it, and there could be multiplicity. And both could be rooted in the living God. So my point is that to set it up one or the other, either objective or subjective, is incorrect from the true perspective of Judaism. Both are true. There is an objective truth. There is also a subjective perspective. Both have to respect each other.
And we also have to differentiate between the manipulation of the past and your own interest.
Right. And you also have to realize, what genre am I in? In other words, if I'm talking facts, I can't speak in the subjective. If I'm talking relationships, I could speak subjective. So it's very important if I'm a reporter and I'm reporting a story, I have to make sure as much as possible to be aware of my bias, to be aware of my subjective perspective and do the best I can. It's impossible to do it completely, and to try to be as objective as possible. But if I'm going to my therapist, the objective is not important. It's the objective perspective is irrelevant, unless now I have to think about it to heal me. But I'm just saying, the point is, you have to realize what arena we're in. Are we in the subjective arena or the objective arena? Both are true. Both have to be respected. And we have to, I think that the perspective of that it's one or the other is wrong. And for many years, for many generations, it was that there's one absolute truth, and Judaism agreed with that with qualifications. But now there is no truth. Everybody has their own narrative. Everyone has their own story. And that's also not true, because there is an objective truth, but there still is a subjective experience. And you could believe in an objective truth without negating the person's subjective experience.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi, you always invite us to personalize aspects of Torah, so I'm going to do it for you right now. It would be as if I wrote a book of my psychotherapy of either Bob or Vicky, The first part of the book would be my version of the treatment. The second version would be their version of the treatment.
And you probably it will not be the same book.
No, it'd be a different thing. As a matter of fact, I very frequently ask a patient after a session to write their description of what they got out of it, because what they got out of it may have almost nothing to do with what I said.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I'll make a little confession here. When I first started teaching, I used to think about, is this a good class? Is it a bad class? People are going to like it or people are not going to like it? I was very concerned. And then very, very, very quickly, I realized that I am a terrible predictor of what people are going to like. I think this people are going to love this. No, they don't care. And this one, oh, I didn't think it was so great, and people like it. So there's the subjective perspective right there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going back to I'm trying to pull back to a detail, but the detail is really gonna hopefully gonna give us a very important message about community, about finding the individual in the community. But the starting point of the discussion is that it starts with the Hebrew. So Moshe is discussing all the successes that we had, and we mentioned this, that he's not just talking about the failures, because if you invite somebody in, let's say you have a colleague and you have to give them you have to give an evaluation, and you list all the things they did wrong. You may be right, but they're not going to listen. So what you have to do is either before or after or together, you have to list their successes, and that's what Moshe is doing. He's talking about the recent successes in the conquest of the land east of the Jordan. And he talks about how mighty those cities were and how fortified they were and how they were able to conquer all of this because of their courage and because of their faith in God. But then he starts jumping back and forth to a word between two words for a city. There's a very common word for a city in the biblical Hebrew, which is Ir. Ir is a city. Ayin Yud Resh, Ir. Even till today, that's how you say city in modern Hebrew. Then there is a word that appears not the first time, but it appears a bunch of times in this week's parsha, and it's the word Kiryah. And Kiryah is also a word for a city, but usually it's a smaller city. It could be like a small city. I don't know. Right now in modern Hebrew, when you say the Kiryah, you mean the headquarters of the Israeli army, like the Pentagon. It's not a Pentagon, but there's a place in the center of Tel Aviv called the Kiryah. But Kiryah literally means a city. So the question is, what is a Kiryah? What is a city? How is it the same? How is it different? Because the Torah keeps saying we conquered all the cities and we conquered all the Kiryahs. What's Kiryah? And like I mentioned earlier, what's interesting is that when it comes to the city of refuge, which is a fascinating topic, because I don't know if we have time to get into it today fully, but it's a fascinating topic then the Torah is also fascinated by it. How do I know? Because the Torah talks about it no less than 3 times. And last week's parsha at great length, next week's parsha, and also in the book of Exodus. And the idea is that if somebody kills someone by mistake, they flee to a city of refuge. But the Torah gets into it in great detail. The Torah is fascinated by it, which is a topic in itself. But in any case, there it says "V'hikritem lachem arim," which is interesting. It says you should set aside for you cities. So it uses the common word for city, which is arim, cities. But then it says the verb of making it a city, designating a city, it uses the root of kiryah, v'hikritem. So whatever a kiryah has to be, it has to be related to the city of refuge. So this is these are the ingredients here that we want to put on the table, and hopefully we'll add some spices, shake the thing up, and put it in the oven. And what comes out hopefully will be very easy to consume and very tasty to the palate. So that's the goal for the next few minutes. Okay, so what's the difference between Ir and Kiryah? There are different philosophies. Some people think, well, maybe an Ir is a regular city and Kiryah could be a walled city, but on a closer analysis, that falls down because the Torah, it seems that the Torah is referring to walled cities as Ir as well. So back to our square question: what's a city? What's a kiryah? And the big idea is as follows. And maybe we'll read some of it inside. But the big idea is as follows: an Ir is a city. Now, when you have a city, you could have many different people living in a city, but each one is in a way lonely, right? You could be living in a skyscraper in Manhattan, and you may not know the names of the people on your floor. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? 100 years ago, you lived in a little town, and you probably knew everybody on your block, with their grandparents' names and their parents' names, and who's the visitor and who's the uncle and who's the aunt, and it was very a cohesive city. Now you could be in a city, and a city is everybody's doing their own thing. There's no inner unity within the city. And the idea is as follows. The idea is that when which city is easier to conquer? So a city with unity, a united city, is obviously much harder to conquer, because you look at the downfall of Jerusalem, which we're going to commemorate on Sunday, I'm sorry, in 2 days. On Sunday, 9th of Av, we know why Jerusalem fell. Jerusalem fell because the Jews within Jerusalem, it wasn't because of the might of the Roman army, even though they were obviously the mightiest army in the world, but we would be able to withstand their siege and be able to wait them out, because they also could not keep an army for 10 years. They can keep an army for a few years, but not for 10 years. And we had enough food for 10 years. But the point is that the factions within the city start having internal strife and internal dispute and internal fighting. And a city that is not united is going to collapse, right? Ask Abraham Lincoln, right? A house divided cannot stand. So the idea here is you have a city, Ir is a technical place. There are streets, there are boulevards, there are roads, there are coffee shops. Everything is fine. But there's a Kiryah. Kiryah is that everybody here has some sort of social cohesion. We're here, we have the same philosophy, we have the same perspective. And that's much harder to conquer. So when Moshe wants to say that the might of the city, so he talks about the physical might, and the physical might is fortifications. So physical fortifications is an obstacle to conquest. And if you can conquer a fortified city, it means you're taking much more risk and you're much stronger and you have much more faith. But Moshe is also talking about the spiritual fortifications of a city. He says, we were able to conquer their kiryahs, their cities where the people have cohesion and the people are connected and care about each other. And that is much more complicated. Now what we want to do is we want to go back to the cities of refuge and see why the Kiryah is critical. And we also want to then talk about what the lesson is for us and what Moshe is signaling to the Jews. But okay, Dr. Tamarin, go ahead. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Rabbi. I never thought about this before. Maybe others have, but that's the beauty of your teaching. What was the essence of Moses that literally kept the Jews together for 40 years? How come they didn't disband?
Oh, so that's very important. Moshe, really, you touched upon the point, which is Moshe saying they have a Kiryah. If you want to overpower their Kiryah, you have to find a deeper unity within yourself, right? So then the question is, what unites us? And if you want to talk about the contemporary questions of the Jewish people, what unites us as a people today, which is a fascinating question, because there are people of so many different cultures and so many different races and so many different philosophies. And 2 Jews is 3 opinions, and multiple Jews is many opinions, and even extremely different opinions. And the question is, what unites what unites us is a very powerful, very important question. And the easy answer is there's an external threat, but that's not the good answer. The good answer has to be a positive answer, right? It can't just be external threat. So yeah, we got to get into that. Hopefully within the next 25 minutes, we have the answer to your question. Okay, let's talk about this idea where somebody kills the city, someone kills someone by mistake. He has to run to the city of refuge. And then basically he has to stay there for sometimes many decades till the high priest dies. And when he's in that location, that's when he's protected from the relatives of the deceased person, and then he's protected. If he goes out, he's no longer protected. Fine. So what is the logic in that? What's the purpose? So the simple purpose, the one reason is, one way to think about it is, it's basically a punishment. Exile is a punishment. You can't live where you always lived. You can't live where your family is. You have to go somewhere else. You have to start out again. Exile is a punishment. And that's one way to think about it. Now Judaism, we don't believe in prison. So you have prison if you have no choice. If a person's dangerous, you put him in prison. But we don't believe in prison as a principle, because prison is you're taking away from the person the one thing that makes the person human, which is free choice. You see, so in the West, we're very civilized. So we're not barbaric. So we don't believe in, we believe that punishment cannot be cruel and unusual. Okay. And that's why when we hear about other parts in the world, let's say where they have corporal punishment, we say, oh, no, 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 that's too barbaric. So instead we come up with a prison. But from the Torah's perspective, what's more barbaric, inflicting physical pain or taking away the person's freedom? From the Torah's perspective, and Torah freedom is critical, when a person, the worst punishment you can do to a person is put them in prison. So sometimes you have to put a person in prison if they're dangerous, but that's not a rehabilitation. Okay, so prison as a form of punishment doesn't exist. It's there to protect the community, but not as a form of punishment. So you can't put the person in prison. What are you going to do? He killed someone. Didn't kill someone on purpose. So if a person kills someone on purpose, it's a capital punishment. But if it was by mistake, so what are you going to do? So you go the next worst, the next severe. If you go one step down in the severity of the punishment, you're going to get exile. That is the conventional interpretation. The problem is that if you start looking at the conditions that the Torah lays upon the city of refuge, you see there must be more to it. It's not just we want to punish this person and make them inconvenience and move to a different place. And one of the things we know is it has to be a city. First of all, those 3 cities, there's 6 cities, there was 3 in Israel, 3 east of the Jordan, are cities that belong to the Levites. And the Mishnah has all kinds of requirements. There has to be not just Levites, but also priests and also Israelites. There has to be people there. There's all kinds of requirements, which tells us that if the purpose is just to create a place where a person has to inconvenience the person as a form of punishment to be able to go away from their native space and go to a new place, then all these conditions would not be necessary. So what is the purpose of the going? So there must be a deeper purpose. And the deeper purpose is when a person kills someone by mistake, even if it wasn't on purpose, so you can't say they're guilty, but there's always a certain degree of I don't want to say negligence because negligence is a legal term, which means that it was their fault, which implies some fault. But certainly there was a lack of sensitivity to human life. If a person was more careful, it would not have happened, right? Because if it's absolute out of the person's hands, that they don't have any punishment. So I'm not going to get into exactly what is the inadvertent killing. But the bottom line is we're talking about somebody who didn't do it on purpose, but there's some insensitivity to human life. And if you were more sensitive to human life, then you would be careful. Then you would be more careful. You know, someone's speeding. Why are they speeding? He's speeding because that's what you do, because we have fast cars, that's easy to speed. But if somebody has awareness that I may be putting people in danger, maybe I wouldn't speed. Now I'm talking to myself because I have to be more careful when I drive. The point here is we have to take this person who in some sense had an insensitivity to human life, and we have to get that person to reconnect in a deeper way and become more aware of not just the self, but other people and the importance of other people and the life of other people. So what are you going to do? So you're going to put them in an environment that has primarily Levites. What are the Levites? Levites are spiritual people. They don't have a portion in the land. They're not trying to amass assets. That's not what they do every day. What are they doing? They're serving the community. And the idea is that when you put this person sometimes for maybe years, maybe decades, and this person is in a new environment, he's in a city of refuge, surrounded by that environment of the Levites then that is also a spiritual change because the person is in a spiritual environment and there are different values surrounding him, and hopefully that would create some degree of rehabilitation, if that's the right word. But the idea is to grow and become more sensitive to the needs of other people and to other people in general, and to understanding the value of human life. So in that sense, now we come back and we start thinking about the idea of the city of refuge. And so the city of refuge says you have to have a hikritem, you have to make it a Kiryah. And therefore, the Talmud says you have to have Levites, priests, and Israelites, meaning to say it's not just a certain type of people. Yes, the city is a city of Levites, but you have to have other people there as well. In other words, you have to have a cohesive community. And this person has to be part of that community. Because if you're in a city of refuge and you're not connecting to anybody and you're sitting in your basement, then it defeats the purpose. The people in the city have to invite you for Kiddush, have to invite you for Shabbat. They have to, in other words, you have to become part. You have to become part of the overarching society in order that you internalize its values. Now, this is something that's more spiritual, but even so what I said now is psychological and practical. But if you want to even talk about from the psychological, from the abstract philosophical perspective, just to frame it in a philosophical way, as an individual, I need atonement. But if I'm now, or I need punishment, or I really could be killed, because remember, if I'm outside the borders of the city, the relative can kill me because I killed someone by mistake. I'm guilty to a degree because I had some degree of negligence. But if I'm part of a collective, now that is also protection because I'm not me. I'm part of something greater than self. So when you think about this person coming to a city of refuge, but really the city of refuge is not a city, it's a Kiryah. It's not a technical city with many houses, but it's a place where people have connection and they're connected by spiritual values. Then, and I'm connecting to those people and those values, then I'm part of a community. I'm not an individual. You can't judge me as an individual. So on one hand, it makes me change because I'm internalizing the values of the community. But even on a philosophical point, it's not, you can't judge me as an individual. You judge me as a member of the community. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's the power of the word Kiryah. So we could talk about this. We could read some of this inside, or we can go to the next step. But go ahead, Vicky. In the meantime, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. That's a beautiful idea about Levites being able to influence, have the power to influence even those who have klipa I mean, some kind of negativity.
Right. Yes.
In that sense, it's more like a reward because they are put in more exclusive position to have access to this kind of influence. But the rest of the population, how do we expand the influence of Levites who have more spiritual power apparently to the rest of these cities if you isolate them in the cities?
So the Levites weren't necessarily completely isolated because they had to actually go around because they had no portion in the land of Israel. They had to go around and collect the tithings, for example, and they had to have relationships with the farms around those cities because those cities weren't. It wasn't in one cluster in Jerusalem. It was actually spread out evenly because you had to have geographically spread out so it could be close enough to all the parts of Israel for a city of refuge. So these cities were actually spread out. And the Levites couldn't stay home because if they stayed home, they would be hungry because there's no food, because there's no land. So they have to actually interact with the Israelites. And part of that trade-off is I support you support my family. I'm a Levite. Maybe I'll teach you to read. Maybe I'll teach you Torah. Maybe we'll, interact in some other way, teach your kid for your bar mitzvah. But the point here is that the Levites could not be totally isolated. And that's the whole point. And that's why they're spread out. And that's why even when Jacob's blessing, when Jacob, before he passes away, the first three sons, instead of blessing them, he gives them words of rebuke. And he says about Shimon and Levi, Achalkem b'Yaakov, basically a curse. I'm going to spread them out and scatter them out throughout Israel. Now that's a negative and a positive. So it's a negative in the sense for themselves. They didn't have their own land to work the land. They had places to live. They had to give them places to live, but they had no land for agriculture. And this is an agriculture society. So if you don't have land for agriculture, you go hungry. But on the other hand, it's also, so it's a sort of a quote unquote punishment for them, but it's also a benefit for the rest of the people. So everything negative could be seen as positive, just like you touched upon the fact that the sinner is being punished, but the punishment is also atonement. And the atonement is also spiritual opportunity. But they have to go away from their house. They can't go to their grandmother's Hanukkah party. Okay, so that's the punishment aspect. It's always layered, is what I'm trying to say.
Also, the emphasis on how important the environment is.
Yes, environment and connecting to the environment. Because today, especially today, like I said, we have a lot of people living in the big cities, but people are lonely. So there's the question of what am I doing to connect to a community? And sometimes it takes an investment. It's not as convenient, to go out of my house and go and connect to people. Some people are rude and some people are annoying, and then I have to put up with this guy and that guy. But the question is, am I investing? The Ethics of the Father says a very interesting statement, which on the surface it sounds very shallow. It says, buy for yourself a friend, acquire for yourself a friend. Kaneg usually means money. So if I don't have a friend, go buy a friend. How do you buy a friend? You go to a guy and you say, let's go out for dinner. I'll pay for dinner. Let's go to the basketball game. I'll buy you tickets. You're buying a friend. Sounds very superficial. What the Ethics of the Father is saying is you have to invest. Invest could be money, it could be time, it could be inconvenience. But yes, this is something, being part of a community requires investment. And sometimes you pay different prices. Sometimes the price is intangible. Sometimes I come to shul, I see everybody, but there's one guy who bothers me. Okay, I have to tolerate this guy. So instead, I could stay home. Because there's a certain cost to come around. But we're saying you have to pay the cost. Because to be not just live in a city, living in a city is not enough. You have to live in a Kiryah, you have to be part of a community. And the psychological values that we know about today. Here we're talking about the practical value. The practical values is if you need atonement, but the practical values is conquest. If you're talking about the national level, if the nation doesn't have a cohesive connection, a cohesive story, a cohesive field connected to each other, they're going to be vulnerable. But that's on the national level. On an individual level, now we know that there's also tremendous psychological benefits and costs for not being part of a community, not feeling connected to other people. And you say, well, it costs me too much, it costs me too much aggravation. Well, and the ethics of the father say, buy a friend. Sometimes you buy means you pay for their basketball tickets to the Madison Square Gardens, and sometimes it means you put up with the annoying person in the back, right? You pay a price. That's what you do. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi, you've talked about a hierarchy of values, and you said that in Judaism, the hierarchy of values is the highest value is caring about other people. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's one ultimately the highest value is connecting to God, but the way we don't see that as separate as connecting to other people, because every person has a spark of God. That's the key here. Every person's created the image of God. And in some ways, the test, if I'm really connecting to God, is if I can connect to the spark of God in somebody else. Right?
Right.
So, yeah.
So
So the answer is yes.
I want to take it further.
Yes.
Two granddaughters who live in a religious community, they define themselves not by their grades, not by their achievements, as we do in secular society. They define themselves without saying it by how kind they are to other people.
That's
They're two of the kindest people I've ever met, and they are remarkable. In our secular society, like here in Greenwich, nobody ever defines somebody else by how kind they are. We talk about how much they've achieved, by how much they've accomplished, by all sorts of other things other than kindness and compassion. And the other thing which is fascinating is no medical schools or universities are defined in terms of how much people care about each other. If you want to see a hierarchy of the best medical schools, you see how much research the grants they get. So,
right.
Of course, they're really upset if the president cuts off the research grants because they're going to be ranked lower. I've never seen a medical school ranked on the basis of how much the people there care for each other or care for anybody else.
Right. But if you think about it, in the modern even in the modern economy, some people would go, not everybody, but some people, at least in the 2000s, maybe now people have changed, they want to work from home, but people would go to where the company offered community, and the Googles of the world, the tech companies of the world cashed into this, and they said we're going to put out ping pong tables because a person would rather work with is a ping pong table than where they get a higher pay.
Yeah, but
Why?
a ping pong table is not the same thing as caring about another human being.
Correct. No, I mean,
Well, ping pong could be just caring about myself.
correct. But I'm saying the idea that I'm connected, that I'm connecting to a place, and we're not just here to work because I spent so many times here, but I care about the people. We connect on a different level, not just on a professional level. And I think people crave that.
Well, except that they don't go to the next level. And the
Right.
next level was how much at Google do people care about each other?
Yeah.
How much is mentoring?
I'm not here to defend Google. I'm just saying
No.
it's a cultural phenomenon. It's interesting that people, when they want to, at least for a time, people were evaluating where am I going to work. It wasn't just it was the culture of the institution, and that was important to people because people are realizing that how important connection is and how important community is.
So let me ask you this, because I've talked about my granddaughters. How much in your community, in your family, and you're the people, do you basically react to your kids less in terms of their achievements and more in terms of their consideration for other people?
You have to ask my kids that answer, but I'll talk about my mother. My mother, when you came home from school the first day, she didn't care who the teacher was, if it was a good teacher or a bad teacher. All they cared about who are the kids in your class? Are they kind kids? Are they nice kids? Because she understood that that's going to make an impact on your personality more than the grade that you're going to get on math. So that was the only thing that mattered. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Kids are, parents are fighting to get their kids into this class, into that class. The only thing she cared about is your friends. Do you have good friends? Are they kind people? And I speak to my 3-year-old come back from camp. I said, who are your friends? Who's kind? Who do you like to play with? Who's nice to other kids? By asking that question, then you start planting in their head that that's a value.
Oh, I get it. Well, you've answered my question. You've answered my question perfectly and personally.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And you answered a lot of mine questions as well, because the environment is very important and we are not isolated, unfortunately. Now with children, grandchildren are not either.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's it's a challenge. The modern world is a challenge, and also with technology. So, people. I heard someone wrote a book about this, about how in America 100 years ago there was so much more spaces for community, and now there's much less. And the car separates people because now we can travel farther and farther apart. And what the person said is the TV came out. So the TV came out, so families stopped talking. Everyone sits on the couch and watches TV. Families stop talking, but at least they're watching the same TV show. Now everyone's sitting on the couch with their own phone watching something different, right? So the trajectory is we're going farther and farther apart, and it takes more and more mindfulness and effort and focus to create a community for yourself. And for some people, it comes easier, and for them, they say, "Oh, it's not, it's a very good time to live in because you have time for yourself and time for the community." But for people who it doesn't come naturally, it's a very big challenge. Go ahead. Dr. Bob, please.
So now that everybody else's questions are answered, I just want to finish questioning mine. Sometimes there is a pivotal point in a country or people's history, like the Revolutionary War. And in this repeating of stories in the Torah, uh, the Meraglim is one of the most essential core elements in the whole Torah. And I mean, we're celebrating it on Sunday or Saturday night. And it just seems to me, as I just reread Rabbi Sacks's thing, in one version, God tells them to do it, and the other version, they offer to do it. In one version, they're asked to be spies, and the other version, they're asked to just, hey, look at the land that you're ready to see. So this would be like saying that the Revolutionary War was between Japan and the Argentinians in Cuba and had nothing to do with Britain. And I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head around
it's so far. The facts are
differences.
so far.
Yeah.
So usually what happens, how do you reconcile the stories? So at least the traditional story is that the people came to Moshe and the people said, "What do you think? Should we send spies? We want to send spies." And Moshe, at least in the first 4 books, doesn't do anything without asking God. So Moshe goes to God. And then God says, Shlach lecha anashim, send for yourself people. For yourself means if you want to. I'm not telling it to you if you want to. So in other words, which story happened? Both stories happened. Which of those details are important? In the first 4 books, from Moshe's perspective, the fact that the people asked for it is irrelevant. Why? Because if the God would say no, then Moshe wouldn't do it. So yes, the people asked for it, but that's not, if you're telling the story, that's not the important factor, right? But in the 5th book, Moshe is talking to the people and saying, where is your responsibility for this? Then it's very important that the people asked for it. So the facts are the same, both in the 4th book and the 5th book. The facts are the same. The way the facts are written down sounds like a completely different story, but to understand why it's so different is because you have to think about the perspective of the one writing it. In other words, the perspective of the writer. In the first 4 books, the request of the people is much less relevant because they would not have sent. Moshe would not have sent without God's permission. So it doesn't matter. The kid comes home and the kid tells mom, can I have ices? And the mom says yes. Why? And I come home and I say, why did you give them ices? Who should I blame, the kid or the mother? Of course, it's the mother, because the fact that if the mother wouldn't say yes, the kid would not get ices. That's one way to look at the story. The other way to look at the story is the kid asked for ices. Why isn't the kid not asking for broccoli? Okay, so it depends who you're talking to, right? So the point is, it's not that it's 2 stories cannot happen together, but they both happen together and they're both true. But how you're telling the story depends on how you are how you are, what you're focusing on, and what your perspective is.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, we have 9 minutes left, and that ties to somebody's question. I think Dr. Tamara's question is, how do you create the unity? I don't remember whose question. So what I want, the big idea here is that the next step of the idea is ultimately the Jewish people fighting against the nation, the local inhabitants are able to create a deeper level of unity. And this is interesting because what unites people? Okay, let's say we have a city and we're all united. What unites people? If what unites people is something materialistic or physical, then ultimately it's not a real unity. Why? Let's say we unite because let's say we unite under some let's say as some let's unite under some economic model that's beneficial for everybody. So why are we uniting? We all love this system because it benefits us all and we all could prosper. Okay. But if you're talking to the materialistic side of people, ultimately, I'm separate than you and I'm focused on self and I essentially don't care about you. I only care about you because you're enhancing me. So in other words, at the core, when you want to drill down and say, do you really care? Are you really united? What really unites you? If the answer to that question of what unites us is something physical, then it's unity, but it's not ultimate unity. Ultimate unity can only come when we're uniting over something spiritual, because that spiritual thing unites us and unites the parts of us that are really one. So if we're united around connection to Hashem, then my godly soul, your godly soul, my soul, your soul, we're all one. So at the end, so in other words, at the core, we really are united. So in other words, what we're trying to say here is you could get a level of unity that is based upon materialistic or physical values. You could do that, and that's what the nations of the nations east of the Jordan were able to do. They were able to build not only cities but fortified cities. Not only fortified cities in the physical sense, but cities that were united over values that were physical and materialistic, but they were united over those values. They had social cohesion over those values. But Moshe is saying we were able to overcome that because ultimately, even in a system where we're connecting where we're connected, but it's based on materialistic values, ultimately it's each man for themselves. Because ultimately, I care about me more about you than more than about you. But if we can get a connection and a bond that's based on something spiritual, then that unity is a more powerful unity and that can overpower the other unity. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, you want to say what brings people together. Ultimately, if you're going to say it's whatever that answer is, if it's going to be a physical thing, then the unity is limited. If it's going to be a spiritual thing, then we could truly be united and truly be connected. And then the Rebbe talks about the idea that it's related to Israel, that according to many of the Jewish thinkers and philosophers, in Israel, it's much easier to tap in to the true unity of the people, but the idea here is that that's in Israel is easier to tap in to that spiritual essence that binds us and makes us one. Go ahead, Dr. Tamron. You are on mute.
All right. So am I unmuted now?
Yes,
Unmuted.
I can hear you.
You hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So here's a strange question, but that's the beauty of your teaching. In a way, without calling it spiritual, does a team that's really united, basketball, football, whatever, actually are best united by maybe not articulated, but a kind of spiritual connection between the coach, who may have a spiritual perspective, and the members of the team themselves? Does that actually take place
I
without
think so.
perhaps even knowing it?
Yes, there's certainly united about we all want to win. We all want to win. That's a unity, and that's fantastic. But we're saying, oh, you're muted. You're muted. We all want to win that, and that's a unity, and that's cohesion. And you could see if you're going onto the sport field, you'll see right away which team each player is fending for themselves. I have an open shot, so I'm going to shoot. I don't care about what the other people want to do. There's no way you can win a game that way. You know, we played in school, in the schoolyard. Right away, we knew some kids or some teams. Everybody's for themselves. Everyone's playing. It's a basketball team, but no, everyone. Whenever they have an open shot, they shoot. There is no sense of strategy in the whole team, and that team is going to lose. I don't care how good the players are. right? And then you have a team that's united. We have a goal, we have a purpose, we want to connect, we want to win. That's a goal. But what I'm saying, but the next level is if ultimately, if the goal is to win, that's a materialistic goal, then we're united, but the unity has a limit. Because ultimately, let's say I could win by taking a shot, even though you wanted to do it. If the winning is the goal, we still are separate entities. We're separate entities coming together to achieve something. But if we have cohesion because we care about each other, and that's the deeper value, and the winning is secondary, then in a way we're actually even more united. Because because ultimately the deeper connection is something where our souls connect, and on that level we're actually one. So the true community has to be a spiritual community. There could be, we're not saying is unity around the materialistic goal is impossible. To the contrary, we're saying that's what we're saying. The people of Sichon and Og, they were so powerful, both physically because of the fortification of the cities, but also spiritually because they were able to create unity amongst themselves. But we're saying we can have a deeper unity, because the deeper unity is not only based on the material, but it's also, but ultimately it's a spiritual connection, which in the spiritual sense, we are actually indeed truly all one. And in that sense, it's not just different people coming together for a corporation, for a shared need, for a shared value, for a shared goal, but we sense that we're one. We're family, we're siblings, we're connected. Ultimately, we're essentially one. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
What you're saying, Rabbi, is really very beautiful and powerful. And do you put more emphasis in that case on your own spiritual, like every person has to be responsible for their own spiritual development, and also for the children to extend, of course, because they have bad influences as well. But do we put more emphasis on each individual personal refinement?
Yeah, I mean, you want to build a community, but there's no way to build a community without individuals, right? The people who care about the collective and don't care about the individual, that we know what they look like, right? That's tyrants. But the point here is, we have to start. If we want to create a community like that, we have to start with the self. And the question is, how do I view another person? And why am I connecting to another person? Because I get something from it, maybe, or because we're tapping into the spiritual sense where we crave this bond because we are essentially, from the soul's perspective, we're all interconnected. We're all one body. We're all one anatomy of a body. That's what Kabbalah teaches, and we're all part of the soul of same soul, all part of the soul of Adam and Eve, right? So ultimately, if you drill down, the more you drill down. By the way, just same thing with the sciences. The more you drill down in the physical world, the more you drill, the more unity you have, the fewer elements you have. On the surface, the table of elements, how many are there? I don't know, 80 something, maybe more. But the deeper you go, you come to the subatomic particles. The deeper you go, it's more and more unity. And if you go even deeper, you get to the oneness of God. So when we drill it within ourselves and we connect to the oneness of Hashem within ourselves, then we can see that oneness in the other person. And Rabbi Sachs talks about this. When I look at another person, am I looking at someone separate than me? Or am I seeing the image of God that that person has, which is essentially the same image of God that I have, a reflection of the image of God that I have, and that's how I view another person, and that's where ultimately the idea of respecting other people comes from. Because if you're looking just on the basis of the physical, I'm always first, and you're very good, and I want you in my community because you enhance my community. So here, I want you to enhance my community. But yeah, you have to start with self. You can't change the world. There was a smart man who said, when I was very young, I decided I'm going to change my whole world. Then I decided I'm going to change it didn't work. I decided I'll change my city. It didn't work. I said, I'll change my family. It didn't work. Then I said, I'll change myself. And then, yeah, that sort of worked. Hopefully worked. So we have to start from the self 100%.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We should have the true unity that will make us strong, both physically and spiritually, because that's what we need in this time of year, especially, and in Israel, especially, the unity and the connection, and that should bring about all the blessings.
Chazak Baruch.
Zaka Baruch. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.